Home can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For some, it can literally be the house you live in, and for others, home can be found in another person or in a place you feel comfortable being yourself. It's supposed to be a space where you can relax, let your guard down, and feel somewhat safe from the outside world. The assumed and perceived safety of being home is why haunted house and home invasion stories are so powerful and terrifying. It's a perversion and destruction of what our homes are supposed to be. A haunted house is scary because our house isn't supposed to betray us, it's supposed to be our refuge. A home is one thing, but where things can get a little more messy and complicated is when you expand that circle and cast a slightly wider net. Your home can change several times throughout your life, but when it comes to your hometown, that is generally pretty inescapable.
Where are you from? Where's your hometown?
For many of us, the thought of going back to our hometown can fill us with anxiety and be pretty stressful. As we get older and mature, we grow and learn from our experiences, changing who we are and who we'll become. But sometimes our hometowns can feel like a hyperbaric time chamber where all our awkward encounters, poor choices, and embarrassing mistakes hang frozen in the air, acting as landmarks around town that knock loose buried memories that can be a strange mix of nostalgia, sadness, and even horror. The year is quickly coming to a close, and that means the holiday season is approaching. And for many of us, that means making plans to go back home to our parents' or other relatives' houses for some festivities. Sometimes just the thought of even making initial plans can start the anxiety. Whether it's figuring out how and when to use PTO or what to do with your pets, it can be a lot. There's an unofficial term for this feeling, and it's called hometown anxiety.
Bad combination. Yeah, on top of an anxiety disorder.
It can be described as something similar to culture shock. If you've been away from home for a while, you've probably built a life of your own with your own routines, friends, and habits. When you go back to your childhood home, that can make you feel untethered because there's a strong pull from your formative memories. You're not navigating new terrain, but trying to navigate your way through a potential minefield of memories.
I have to wade through all of Dean's most terrible memories.
Another pitfall to watch out for is something called holiday regression. Being back in your childhood home and possibly even sleeping in your childhood room can cause some people to revert back to an earlier developmental stage as a way to cope with the stress. This can look like a lot of different things and isn't always the worst thing in the world. Your family might dust off some old habits and snap back to specific roles. You might lose some autonomy when it comes to picking up after yourself, or maybe your mom might just start doing your laundry again without even asking. It can even cause some guilt to build up because you know you're perfectly capable of doing these things, but for some reason you just aren't anymore. I'm normally a pretty active person, but when I get back to my parents' house, I suddenly get super lazy and I just tend to lay around.
Sorry, I have to go to bed. Sorry, I'm so tired.
Psychologists often refer to family units as systems. From the moment we are born, we are put into a system between ourselves and our parents, and if there are siblings, that adds even another layer to the system. Even though we may not feel it on a conscious level, our lizard brain can put us back into that mindset. No matter how old we get, we'll always be a child in our parents' system, and that may trigger some unwelcome feelings and some lashing out in unexpected ways. But holiday regression can also be a lot of fun. The holidays are often a time when some of your childhood friends are all back in town. More than likely, the people you were closest to when you were going through growing pains and discovering yourself all moved away after high school. Some went off to college, some moved for career opportunities, but now you're all back and probably don't have the responsibilities of real life clawing at you for the time being. There's something special about meeting up with old friends and hitting up the local bars to see who's changed and who's stayed the same. Although at this point we've all gotten a little older and the consequences of a night out on the town are more dire the next morning than they may have been when we were a little younger.
I'm never drinking again.
There are several reasons you might go back to your hometown. Some situations can be more stressful than others. As we get older and feel the effects of aging more and more, we start to become more cognizant about our time spent on this planet. The time we've already used and the amount of time we possibly have left.
Old, I'm alone, I'm gonna die soon.
Another side effect of really realizing we're aging is that we start to notice that our parents are also getting older. Maybe your parents don't have the energy they used to for projects around the house or doing yard work. You might notice they don't remember things quite as well as they used to, and they may start to avoid driving at night because their vision is starting to decline. Ultimately, we're all going to come to the end of our journey. For some, it may be quick and sudden, and for others, it might be a little more drawn out. For those holding on during the decline of their life, they may need end-of-life care. Whether it be for financial reasons or personal reasons, some people may choose to spend their final days in their own home, and that care can often fall to the immediate family. Getting the call to come help care for a dying loved one can inject a complicated cocktail of emotions into you. There will be the initial shock and sadness of the news, but death is rarely convenient. You may have to move things around when it comes to the plans you made, or you may have to take time off work, which can add a layer of frustration, which can add a nice sprinkle of guilt to top everything off for even being annoyed in the first place, because, you're not the one who's dying after all.
I'm sorry if my complicated life is an inconvenience to your perfect existence.
And that brings me to what inspired this video in the first place. I recently read 2 horror books that have similar catalysts for starting their story. Someone is forced to move back to their childhood home and care for a sickly or dying relative. When faced with the mortality of that person who raised you, memories and past traumas can be shaken loose. Things that would have been better off left forgotten and not re-examined. And it often starts with a phone call saying you need to drop everything and come home now. Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey takes the classic haunted house formula and gives it a little bit of a twist while keeping you guessing the entire time. We follow Vera, whose mother just called her and commanded her to come home. Vera and her mother have been estranged for a long time, ever since her mother kicked her out of the house as soon as she was old enough to do so. Vera arrives at the house to find it almost perfectly preserved and exactly the way she remembers it from her childhood.
It's just like I remember. Like no time passed at all.
There have been a few minor changes, but one of the bigger changes is that her mother has now moved her bed into the dining room, where she is essentially bedridden and looks extremely ill. Instantly, things snap back to where they were left off between them. Vera's mother is cold and matter-of-fact towards her, and since Vera is the only child, she will have to sort through the family's belongings and prepare the house to be sold after her mother passes. Vera's mother also demands that she not refer to her as mom, but by her name, Daphne.
The bitch, Daphne!
As we navigate the rocky and cruel relationship between Vera and Daphne, we slowly get drip-fed clues that some horrible incident happened in the house during Vera's childhood, an incident having something to do with her father. This has made Vera and her family pariahs to the town, which is why Vera has never come back. A big reason the house so closely resembles the way Vera remembers it is because Daphne has meticulously preserved the house and turned it into a museum of sorts.
Where are we? Is this a museum?
Artists, reporters, and some people interested in the occult have been paying to visit and stay in the small guest house on the property. Since her father left, Daphne has been able to survive through the money she's made using the notoriety of the house itself. That's all I'll say about the plot. I don't want to give any more away because there's a lot more to uncover in this story. The book takes a deep dive into family trauma and how that trauma and lie can be perpetuated. It does a great job of portraying the anxiety of going back to your hometown and facing the memories and choices you made in your younger years. It also demonstrates how even though you've been blatantly wronged and abused by some family, there may still be a small part of you that wants to earn their approval and love. This was a fun read, and the dual storylines set up by jumping back and forth between Vera's childhood and the present kept me wanting to read faster and find out what happened in her past to create all this terror in her present. Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy not only explores the stress and trauma that can accompany the journey back to your hometown, but also navigates the horror of growing older into middle age, specifically from the perspective of a middle-aged woman. We follow Mary, who is a quiet and honestly unremarkable person. She works at a struggling bookstore where she stocks books in the forgotten section of the store, and she likes that she can do her work and basically be forgotten about. Unfortunately, she's fired from this job because things are changing. The store is trying to modernize and bring in new customers, and they just don't need her role anymore. In Mary's heart, she takes this as their way of saying that the store is rebranding and trying to attract younger and hipper customers, and that she's just too old to be there.
I'm old. Alone.
Being fired from her job is just the icing on the cake, though. For a while leading up to this, she started to notice changes in her body and her health. A major change is that she can no longer look into any mirrors or reflective surfaces without fainting. Her reflection will begin to melt and distort, and before she knows what happened, she wakes up on the floor. She's seen a doctor about this and asked for any kind of guidance or help, and it's been dismissed with the explanation of middle age and menopause causing hormonal disruptions. Mary was already barely scraping by living in New York, but once she lost her job, she was left with no choice but to move back to her hometown and live with her Aunt Nadine. She went into this hoping to recollect and maybe rediscover herself, but things just ramp up even more once she gets back to her hometown. She starts to see the ghosts of mutilated spirits everywhere she looks around town and begins auto-writing weird messages and losing time. All of this slowly reveals not only the past trauma that Mary has experienced growing up in this town, but it also reveals the collective trauma of the community and how they've tried to dismiss it.
Nothing's wrong, all right?
So that's enough specifics about the story. I don't want to give too much away in case you decide to pick this book up. This book dives into the horror that can be drummed up when you return to your hometown after being away for years, the awkwardness and uncomfortable encounters that can happen randomly as you wander around the town. And it also explores the pain of growing older and how society tends to discard people as they age, as if to say they're no longer useful and have nothing left to contribute. And this is specifically from the perspective of a middle-aged woman going through menopause. And it's kind of a long book, but it's very easy to read, and I found myself flying through the pages. There's some genuinely scary moments, some heartbreaking scenes, and they're all accompanied by some gory and violent outbursts. Whether you're going home for the holidays or because you received a sudden and unexpected phone call, going home can be a pretty scary situation. It's something we all have some experience with one way or another. You did your time growing up in your hometown and then moved away, built a life and established a routine. Now you've got to put your present on hold and take a trip back to blow off the dust of your past, which can be fun and healing in some ways, but if you're not careful, it can uncover some things you tried to forget and suppress. The ghosts of your past might wake up and decide that they're ready to follow you back to your new life.